Hello, hi everyone. I'm Christina Chia. I go by Chris with friends and colleagues, and I use she pronouns. I want to just start by thanking Ms. Capers and Mage and the entire CMA staff for all your work organizing this milestone celebration. I really wish I could be there with you in person, not only with the CMA folks, but the audience. But I'm away from Durham because of a family health issue, so unfortunately have to join you both remotely and asynchronously. Still, it's just such an honor to be part of this event and to be asked to say a few words about the legacy of unity through diversity, which, to me is kind of an overwhelming idea. So my current position at Duke is Associate Director at the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute, but I'm here today because between 2000 and 2002, 2003-ish, when I was a PhD student in the English department, I worked as a graduate assistant at what was then called the Office of Intercultural Affairs, or ICA, working with Julian Sanchez, who was the director at the time, and with Ms. Capers. So my role was to provide research support for ICA as well as for the students that ICA supported, especially Asian American students. And I helped draft reports and other documents, and I also worked on developing connections with faculty. So the first annual Unity Through Diversity took place in November 2000, and that quickly became the focus of my work. And so now I'm going to just share some slides with you as I talk through the rest of this. I just want to say that I have a little bit of a makeshift setup here, so please bear with me. There may also be some construction noise, which seems to have quieted for the moment. Okay, all right. So unity through diversity. I want to start by sharing a kind of, time capsule or a capsule history. It's not properly a time capsule, I guess, from my perspective as someone who was a participant and an observer at the time. The first UTD was convened by Intercultural Affairs in partnership with Duke student communities of color. Leading up to the event, the ICA worked with the students to assemble a proceedings document, a collection of states of the community, if you will, that included historical overviews, program overviews, research data, and specific proposals that addressed, in many cases, longstanding needs. The table of contents of the proceedings should give you a sense of the coalitional vision that animated the whole project. You can see the range of communities that were involved, not to mention the name Unity Through Diversity itself. And in subsequent years, LGBTQ students, South Asian students, and others would sort of join the coalition. While there were variations and distinctive needs from community to community, certain similar issues, just came up over and over. Issues like recruitment, representation in the curriculum, and most importantly, at the time, funding and space. At the luncheon, representatives from the participating student groups gave brief addresses. In many cases, they were also spoke alongside faculty and staff, advisors and allies. The audience was a veritable who's who. Then President Nan Cohen, then Provost Peter Lang, the senior leadership of student affairs, you name it. But, if you look at the Chronicle the next day, you'll find, no coverage at all of UTD. At least I haven't been able to find it. And maybe this was because of a historical accident too, November 7, 2000, it was election day, and it was the famous disputed Bush v. Gore. So you can see the headline on the front page, "At daybreak, too close to call." So, but when the second UTD rolled around in the following year, the Chronicle would run this article describing the first forum as influential, and that's in the first red circle I put there, and crediting it with, quote, setting the tone for cultural and ethnic programming and funding initiatives for 2001. So just to unpack that last sentence a little bit more, in the wake of the first UTD, President Cohen appointed a committee on cultural space, which ultimately led to the creation of the new Multicultural Center in the Bryan Center, and the expansion of the Mary Lou Williams Center and its relocation from the basement of the Union Building to the top floor. It also led to the creation of the cultural funds, which, as I understand it, the CMA continues to administer to this day. So I want to be clear that UTD was not, by no means the starting point of these initiatives. Both the Mary Lou and Multicultural Center proposals, for example, pre-existed the forum and had been floating around for quite some time. Nor was UTD the only event that moved the university to act. Remember, again, we're in November 2000. About 5 months later, in April 2001, student protests broke out in response to a full-page anti-reparations, sort of racially provocative ad that the Duke Chronicle accepted and ran from David Horowitz, a sort of leading right-wing college politics troll of the time. They're now kind of dime a dozen. The protesters named themselves the Duke Student Movement, placed themselves in the lineage of the Allen Building takeover, and garnered the support of a multiracial coalition. They presented a set of demands to the university on Black faculty recruitment, the status of African and African American studies, the need for space, funding, and other student resources. The Space Committee, as I mentioned, was already slated to report back before the end of the semester, but it's hard not to see that the Duke Student Movement sped up the response to UTD as well. And here I just pulled up a couple headlines to show you a bit of the timeline of the events of April, kind of maybe shaping the events later in May and beyond. Now, I'm not a theorist of social change or social movements, but for me, this is a really striking instance of how movement energy converge with the slower burning support building work of an institutional advocate like CMA to affect meaningful change. So that's, I think, the basic linear narrative, which someone else could have perhaps told you. So I also want to share with you, although just a little bit briefly, a layer of more fragmented sense memories that maybe are more specific to my experience working on this project at the time. So one of my most vivid memories of that period in general was typing away at my desk in the reception area at the old Intercultural Affairs office in the West Union Building, now the Broadhead Center. That space, which was mentioned quite a few times actually in the UTD documents, was a small suite, kind of small, long, rectangular suite with 2 staff offices and a reception area. It was an inconspicuous place in the corridor across from the dining hall that was easy to miss and walk right past. I remember, giving people directions to the office, something like, look for the door across the hall from the Chick-fil-A. So there was a campus Chick-fil-A, which is a whole another story. But, anyways, that ICA office literally doesn't exist. And I've put kind of orange squiggle around where I think that office, would be, given sort of like the positions of the window on the edge of the Broadhead Center. So, but again, so that place is just gone, right? But of course, I say this with no nostalgia. The trajectory of the center from West Union to Bryan Center, from ICA to CMA, is a big part of what we're celebrating here today. I also remember, and I wish I remembered more, the faces and voices of the students who worked with ICA on the first forum or just worked with us kind of, in that period in general. I remember the open-hearted laugh of Bianca Williams, who was on our staff at the time as an undergraduate and was a committed campus activist, and is now, just an extraordinary anthropologist, scholar, organizer at the City University of New York. I remember the look of bright determination on the face of Kelly Fired, president and also just one of, I think, 4 members of what was then called the Native American Students Coalition, when she would come to the office to meet with Ms. Capers on various NASC business. Kelly just had this sort of face of just, someone who was going to get things done. And I remember at the luncheon itself, Patty Chen, representing the Asian Students Association, giving a fiery and impassioned speech. And I remember just the kind of stunned look, frankly, on the face of some of the audience members, I think, who were a little bit taken by surprise at the sort of power that was sort of emanating from this relatively sort of small Asian American woman. So kind of contra stereotype, and it kind of took people by surprise. I really wish there was a recording of the event, but unfortunately, I don't think there is. So, and in the small amount of archival digging that I did to jog my memory for today, I came across a number of other students that I've forgotten over the years. Middle age is no joke. But as soon as I saw their names in the archives, they snapped right back into focus, and their spirit, their commitment, their voice were instantly recognizable. So one of the advantages of getting older is that you can fit your memories like puzzle pieces into a larger picture. Going back to my capsule history for a moment, a lot happened in that 2-year span immediately following the first UTD. And you don't need to, or you don't need me to tell you that institutional change doesn't always unfold so quickly. University time is slow, marked by increments of committee reports. And I say this as an administrator myself. So as undergraduates, your time at Duke is necessarily transient. 4 years go by in a flash. But transience doesn't have to mean disappearance. A UTD-related example, one that extends beyond UTD, an example that comes to mind is the long and ultimately inspiring history of Asian American studies at Duke. As you can see in this brief narrative on the website of the Asian American and Diaspora Studies program, the program was established in 2018 after over 20 years of student activism. So the first UTD, which included a call for included a sort of kind of proto version of a call for Asian American Studies curriculum in the proceedings, was one node near the beginning of that 20-year timeline. You can see that there was a burst of intense activities around 2002, but after that things slowed down with occasional spikes. There's this kind of blank space. It wasn't until 2016 that a new wave of student activism gathered force, buoyed and sustained by serious faculty support, that another burst of institutional developments followed. So thanks to my position at the CMA, I had a front row seat to the student organizing circa 2002. Again, much of it, some of it kind of overlapped with some of what we were doing with UTD, but really extended beyond it as well. So when the program, the Asian American Studies program, hosted its inaugural conference in 2018, it was amazing to see Christina Chris Xu, one of the main organizers from the early aughts, returning to speak on a panel. I just juxtaposed 2 documents here, two flyers here, and Chris's name is in both, right, from 2002 to 2018. So to end these reflections, I want to bring the spotlight back to our honoree, the Center for Multicultural Affairs. I spoke earlier about the coalitional vision of unity through diversity in terms of its horizontal reach across identities and communities. But I think it's also important to think about the vertical ties across generations and to celebrate the role that the CMA has played historically as an intergenerational guide or navigator and intergenerational partner for Duke students of color. At moments of accelerated change, an institution like CMA can provide the critical support that students need to navigate complicated university terrains. There's no Google map to university structures. And in the long arc between points of momentous shift, it can serve as a safekeeper of collective memory, and it has. Now, I like to think just on a kind of personal note that I have a pretty long memory. You know, I have all kinds of anecdotes, you know, for days, but I can assure you that Ms. Caper's memory is even longer and deeper and more precise. And that deep memory doesn't just reside with her alone, but flows from the history and mission of the center itself. Just in, you know, in the interactions I've had with Mage and Alex and others, you know, in the last few weeks, in preparation for this event, you know, I can see the care that they've put into conceptualizing this, organizing this, framing the way that they framed the proceedings, the leading from love theme, all of that I think flows from the history and sort of depth, you know, the deep memory of the center. Okay, so I'm going to end my slide so I can do this last part more face-to-face. So CMA, as one 50-year-old, almost 51, to another, happy birthday, and thank you so much for all of your work. Bye.